Marie already. There we go. So here we are, another week together. I just want to say on this night of the biggest full moon of 2025, the bare moon, and a day after the most horrible war criminal dies, and a socialist is elected mayor in New York City, and there's a blue wave that takes over all the other elections. So in the way that we, and it's all about local, it was all about local. I just remind everyone the Mondami's win is about a local peace economy. It is not about politics. It's not about the fake democracy we live in. It is about local peace economy. All those 100,000 volunteers are people that work in the local peace economy, that understand the war economy viscerally, that know its effects, that feel its effects, and that's why they're in the streets. And if you look at his platform, it is a local peace economy platform, because what are we talking about? We're talking about all the peace economy things that get starved by the war economy: education, childcare, healthcare, free transportation. It's all the things that help us live a life and thrive. Instead of wasting our time getting to work and wasting our money on things that should be cared for by the culture, by the structure that holds us, the peace economy structure. So let's just say that's a major victory in what we're always teaching that the local peace economy is. And so, as we always do, I just want to start with 2 deep breaths to just have this chance to witness and feel this amazing life that we have, this amazing life that so many people have, strived so that we could have this, so that we could take this breath. So please take in this deep breath into your lungs, into your toes, into just this amazing body that we get to experience life with. And then exhale. And then one more time as we just come present together. Here we are in this community, in this capacity to do what we do locally and also learn from each other across the country, in this other community that we build, the circles of community that keep us whole, that keep our souls and spirits nourished and our hearts nourished, and where we can learn together. So now that we're here, I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest tonight. I was just trying to figure out how long I've known Drew Dellinger, but we met at Pioneers, I think, the first time. And Drew is a heart. Drew is brilliant. He's a revolutionary in the form of a creator, writer, speaker, poet, teacher. He uses culture and the connective tissue for community, and he's a master of it, having committed his life to it. He's also the author of the award-winning poetry collection Love Letter to the Milky Way, and he's got a book coming up which is the Ecological King, which has been hailed as unprecedented, pioneering, and path blazing. But we know that because Drew's poetry is always path blazing and heart enlightening. So Drew is someone who lives the peace economy. And I've asked Drew to open tonight with one of his poems. So we'll start, Drew, with welcoming you and grounding us in the piece of culture. We always start with a piece of culture, a poem, to ground us in the recognition that it is culture that creates our collective economies that we live within. So thank you, Drew, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to connect with all of you. And I appreciate that generous and kind introduction. And it's great to be here with you and my friend Marie Goodwin as well. But here's a poem to get us rolling. This I posted feels kind of like a bookend moment in a certain way, with the off-year election last night, because I posted this poem on January 20th of this year when Trump was inaugurated, of course. This is called To the Quislings. To the quislings, to the cowards, to those thirsting after power, heaven and history will record what you do. To the obsequious, to the toadies, to the lackeys, to the yes men, to the go along to get along, return on your investment in the fall of Rome you call your home, heaven and history are witnessing. To the Bezos and Zucks, to the Murdochs and Musks controlling our thoughts with trolls and bots, to the fascists who would ruin all the world to rule the ashes, to the vote suppressors, disenfranchisers, and Jim Crow juniors, heaven and history are recording what you do. The whole world, sorry, I got lost my place. I got to go back on this because I feel so strongly about this. Um,
But
we have to restore the Voting Rights Act, right? And we have to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. So, to the vote suppressors, disenfranchisers, and Jim Crow juniors, heaven and history are recording what you do. To those filled with rage who can't tell, this will not age well. To the tuned out, apathetic both sidesers in the middle who won't do a thing because you can only do a little. To the 80 million folks with better things to do than vote, but especially to those of you in powerful positions. The editors in chief, the billionaires, the politicians, heaven and history are recording what you do. The whole world is watching, and the little ones too. History and heaven are recording your example, and the downtrodden, trampled upon masses never stay trampled. So, to the powers of the hour, don't be shocked to see 100 million folks standing up for democracy. We can win. We can win. We've got to begin, though. The climate's cooked, the window's closing. Now is the time. We need dreaming, not dozing. To everyone around the world who won't cease to work for workers, solidarity, the planet, justice, peace, heaven, and history are supporting what you do. To those who, in the spirit of love, are steadfast and brave, history and heaven will remember your name.
mm. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a beautiful way to start, and how amazing that you wrote that, and here we are in the after of it. So, Drew, I want to start because community is what the war economy tries to destroy. It's one of the main things it tries to destroy, and to force us into behaving as individualists and convinced that that's how life should be. And can you share with us, like, personally, you've been doing this work in community, you as a poet, you do this to nourish your community. It's your way of bringing people into connection with themselves and community. What are the things that you have learned as you have deepened yourself into this work? And what's surprised you?
I love that you invoke this theme of community because it's so multivalent, I guess is a word we use at the grad school I went to, the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program. And I want to mention that too because I want to mention cosmology as well. So when you say community, I think on so many different levels. Obviously, there's the human organizing, cultural worker, arts activist, and how that is so vital for social movements and organizing. But the earth is a community, right? And so reality is a community. There's it's nested, it's nested communities within nested communities, right? So we all know. So it's like those that system that you're talking about that wants to divide and conquer, that wants to disrupt community, that wants to make us feel alienated so that we are, malleable and dissatisfied and, prone toward consumerism, and all of these things that we know. So, and of course the cosmos is a community, right? That is the ultimate. That's what my primary teacher, I've been blessed with a lot of mentors and teachers, but my primary teacher was Thomas Berry, and he used to say, the universe from the beginning is a single the multiform energy event. It's an unfolding, seamless unfolding of energy manifested in different forms, you know. And it's like, and what does it do? The universe is celebration. The stars shine, the rivers flow, the birds sing, you know, the flowers blossom, all in ecstatic celebration. So, and that's, you know, a nice segue back into the arts, right? Because this is celebrate, you know, if in Thomas Berry's vision, you know, it's like I wouldn't be so dogmatic to say this is the way to interpret the, you know, but it's such a beautiful interpretation and vision that Thomas Berry offers of this cosmological, you know, plethora of celebration manifested in it. So the Milky Way galaxy and the Earth and the cosmos are all blossoming like a symphony of technicolor, you know, poetry. I mean, it's the nuttiest thing that's ever happened, you know, just the scientific story. So it's like part of the arts is kind of like that, you know, the same way that, you know, a scientist or like the way it's presented in eighth grade, you know, or, you know, 10th grade physics class or whatever can be dry and, you know, disconnected, but to have a cosmological vision that's deeper than science, and that you can't be alienated in a cosmological vision. And that's what Barry was saying. We need a cosmology based on science, connected to the sacred stories and indigenous wisdom and the religious traditions at their best, but, you know, with the new understandings that we have and the new photographs of galaxies that we have, you know. And so this was kind of his take, but I think the arts are so similar to cosmology in the sense that they're about just tripping out and delving into and celebrating the many layers and complexities and nuances of reality. And activism I've always thought of as kind of, you know, I don't even love the word activism. I'm sure some of y'all can relate to this. You know, we use these words because there's not, you know, necessarily better ones at hand, but you know, you know, I'm more in awe of you know some the courage and the organizing power of someone like Jody, you know, who's been a hero of mine for a long time. So I think organizing as opposed to thinking of our and in community as opposed to thinking of ourselves as like individual activists, of course. But we use these terms activism as kind of a shorthand, and I think there is a very mystical sensitivity to the cosmos, a mystical sensitivity to the personhood and the reality and the feelings of other people and other beings, and that there's somehow a link of radical sensitivity that links the artist and the cosmologist and the activist in a very profound way. And it's all about, and so to me, just to wrap this up, to me, social justice, cosmology, ecology are all about community, you know, and personhood too. If we think of personhood in an ecologically expanded kind of cosmic sense, that, you know, personhood of every being and every person that is sacred and deserves to be defended from rapacious systems, right? And politics and economics, and the personhood of, you know, our interiority, you know, that the poet shares in a public way. So anyway, you know, I'm kind of getting lost in the sauce, but you get the points that I'm making, that to me, interconnectedness and community are like all woven through all of these discussions about justice, about cosmology, about eco justice, you know, about the climate crisis. And that's, you know, just to end on this note, that's what we see so much of. What, you know, I was learning from Jody Evans 25 years ago is what we see these younger generations talking about every day on TikTok or wherever they are, where they're going like, gender justice is climate justice and racial justice is climate justice, and they get the intersectionality and the you know. But that was some of the things that I was trying to articulate as, you know, as a person somewhat involved in the global justice movement, you know, 25 years ago or whatever. And, you know, through my poetry as well as, you know, my teaching and my work on Martin Luther King as an ecological thinker, because it's that intersectionality again between social justice, ecology, and cosmology.
Wow. So, yes. And thank you for pulling in all the communities that we're part of, because that's part of the local peace economy, is like the local brings you, like working locally and working in the relationship with the human brings you in a deeper relationship with the cosmos and with Earth, because it's all there. It's all present. The problem is that so much of the war economy takes us away from even being present. And so I think that's what you try to do with your poetry. At least that's what I experience with your poetry, is that attempt to bring us present. And, even just, I hope everybody heard in what he was saying, it's that space that you're talking about, Drew, that is life. It's the vibrancy, it's like you were bringing it alive. And how do you see, how is that tamped down in our world? And how can we as individuals, individual actors, community actors, pump it back up? We all just got to feel that from you. So you always didn't do that. Where's the bridge, and where do you find the things that might stop someone, and what's the encouragement, what are the breadcrumbs that bring us across that bridge to be more vividly in the rooms, that make vividness happen in the people in the room?
Yeah, I love that. That's such a rich question, and again, it cuts to, all of these deep systemic issues of like child psychology and early childhood education and later childhood education, and how our psychology is and our creativity. Especially we all have probably heard Ken Robinson, talking about how creativity. But I remember even before I'd ever heard of Ken Robinson, I remember somebody saying who was an educator, or somebody who spoke to like grade level, like kindergartners, basically. He would go into the room and he would say, "Who?" Oh, think it was Robert Coles, maybe if you know Robert Coles's work. But he would say, I'm not positive, but he would say like, "Who here can sing? Who here can draw?" Oh, every hand went up. When it's a kinder, who can sing? Who can draw? Who can make music? And then 5 years later, when you ask the fifth graders or whatever, it's a couple of shy hands go, that's a tragedy. That's a pedagogical, nightmare. So, and then we, of course, all understand that the capitalist economy is like structuring our daily hours and our like energy and, and our family time, much less our like, and our health, and much less, our creativity. But I think it comes, the same way that everything comes in a capitalist, war economy, is that we have to build it and we have to scrape for it and we have to stand for it and we have to speak for it and we have to educate for it. And, part of that is, of course, transforming the educational system entirely, but it's also like, what's something that I can do that doesn't require me to suddenly have 5 extra hours, when I'm not doing it. I mean, I actually, Z- when Zoran said last night about childcare, and he had just said free buses, and then they said child, I actually started crying. I mean, I started tearing up. It's like that's a game changer. And that's something that activists understood. Through the set. I remember reading about one of the first, conferences in the late '60s where they offered where the left offered childcare. At the big thing. It's like, these things are not, small. So anyway, but back to the point about what was I just talking about, Jody? Because there was something I did want to honor more of what you said about things that you can learn and like the human level of
And
community and
yeah,
how arts and how like my friend part of what you said earlier reminds me of what our friend David Solnit says about, it's like the arts are fun, and like he uses the arts to organize. People want to get together and build giant puppets with fun paint and cardboard rather than hear another lecture. You see what I'm saying? So to somebody like David Solnit, the arts are integral to how he's organizing. But I think just now I know what the thought is. Just to finish that thought that I was having before was, we have to we're offered the opportunity every day to make a commitment to our creative lives, and it's not easy and it's, and it hasn't been easy for me. And I've got ADHD and it's like I like, flunked half my courses in high school because I didn't know, I had undiagnosed and untreated ADHD and all this stuff, so it's like, and it's like I ain't got like a ton of income streams from the arts, and like and this type of thing. So it's it's situational, like not everybody has a lot of time to dedicate to writing, but all of us can make a commitment to start being more aware of language and images and things and how we would constellate experiences into words and images is. And you see what I'm saying? So just to wrap this part up, I sometimes tell people when I teach writing workshops, to activate your poetic antennae, like turn on, your awareness, and you'll find poetic phrases, washing over you every day. The things that I can't tell you, I could list 8 times people said things that are now like phrases in my book of poetry. It's like, I one time was in a class with Brian Swim, the cosmologist, and he was talking about what the physicists call the moment of decoupling in the early evolution of the universe. And he was saying, this is the moment when the universe turns transparent and all the light shoots through the cosmos. And I'm like sitting here with the whole classroom full of students, and I looked at, it's 30 people in a circle of desks, and I looked and nobody's pen or pencil was moving. And I said, thank you very much. I'll take that. The moment the universe turns transparent and all the light shoots through the cosmos, that's in one of my poems now, so it's like write things down, make a commitment to yourself as a creative person. I think is one kind of take your creative life seriously. I think is one kind of small, immediate step that everybody can take, And Anne Lamott says, if you don't carry around a piece of paper and a pen, then God gives your ideas to somebody else.
Whoa, okay. Well, I mean, what I just got from what you said is because I asked the question about like, how would you do this? But what you're saying is be aware of it. I mean, because in your awareness, it then flows from your own self. That's what you just described. Because I asked you the question about what, how could you share this with everyone here? And what you shared was be aware of the magic in the room. Because in that awareness, that magic is yours to share. And I think that's profound. And I think I really want everybody to feel what he just said, because, we're hearing the passion and the aliveness, and yet, and the place where everybody says, I don't do that. But, one of the things I see when we get together in the circle and, people are like in the local peace economy circle, one of the things people feedback all the time is I didn't realize I knew that, because the new questions and the solving of new problems brings you into parts of yourself that are never tapped. And so what I'm hearing, Drew, is by witnessing you become it. Does that feel right?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think so. I mean, it's kind of like there's this Eastern, spiritual story about this, like this thief who's running away from, the magistrates or the police or whatever, and he has to jump out a window and sit under a tree and pretend like he's, an enlightened, spiritual teacher, and to convince the police who are wandering around, he has to stay there for several days, and he ends up becoming an enlightened spiritual teacher. And they're kind of fake it till you make it type of thing. But yeah, just about every artist, the one at any level of success, will tell you that nobody gave me permission to do this, and I had to kind of claim it for myself, and it does take a certain boldness. I think to be a good artist requires a sensitivity and a humility and an openness and a curiosity, but it definitely takes a certain boldness and a certain confidence that can be hard to sustain. So we have to kind of support ourselves in that and encourage each other, as we build systems that, enable our creativity to flourish rather than, capitalism and eco-destruction. That's what we're going to do in the post-war, post-consumerist extractive economy is, the arts of community and self-cultivation and collective cultivation of spirituality and creativity and, community building, etc. So I think the arts are just integral to education, integral to, they should be much more integral to the economy, integral to activism. Like to me, arts are one of those things like worldview, like personhood, like community that are just woven through all of these topics at so many different levels, right?
And so you're both talking about the effects of the war economy and how it's not supportive to culture. And we understand why, is because when you're practicing the arts, when you're in creativity and in imagination, you're not hooked into the machine. It hooks you out of the machine. So maybe you can share some of the places where you've, like, there must have been choice points in your life where you had to choose for this space of liberation, creativity, nourishment, what it gives, and what, not only what you experience, but what you experience that gift when you are in a room from yourself to others. Just your capacity to witness what's in the room and reflect it back as a poet, which is such a rare experience because it's that space where we can live inside of truth and life that is rare and going to be rarer given AI, where everything is, manufactured. And this is just, so where have you been your choice points, and what are your, what has helped you through those moments of the choice points?
To me, I've always felt of my thought of my kind of like my poetic, dabblings as so linked to like other intellectual interests of mine. Because otherwise, I don't know what I would write about. Yeah, and activist, and like spiritual and like and like educational interests of mine. Because otherwise, I kind of feel like I don't know what I would write about. I think a lot. A lot everybody's process is different, so there's probably a lot of people who can go to a desert island and write 14 volumes of poetry, but like I like to have a lot of books around. I like to like I studied with Thomas Berry. This was a big commitment. I was 20 years old, and like me and my buddy, we're basically like just knuckleheads from North Carolina. Like we flew to Seattle to meet Thomas Berry and Brian Swim and Joanna Macy, and then 9 months later or a year or so later, we're flying to Italy to study with Thomas Berry for 2 weeks. It's like these were rather than when I could have been like back in Chapel Hill, like drinking beer at like a frat party, that they have in the summer, this type of thing. So, but there's ways in which I remember I had a job teaching at John F. Kennedy University where I was like a director of the program in social ecology. And I just realized at one point that I wasn't gonna be able to finish my dissertation. Somebody else probably with that maybe didn't have ADHD or was more disciplined or structured or whatever. But I realized I wasn't gonna be able to finish my dissertation that I'm now years and years later turning into a book on Martin Luther King. So it's like I remember it took me like a year and a half to get to the point where I could start writing my dissertation. I had to kind of unwind from that job, step down from that job. You see what I'm saying? It's like, so with like my ADHD and some of these projects, like I'm embarrassed to tell people that sometimes if they knew a couple 15 years ago that I was working on a book on Martin Luther King, that I'm still working on the same.
Mhm.
Every now and then I bump into somebody and they go, "You're still working on that book on Martin Luther King," so there's ways in which having ADHD, trying to be a writer, it's like I didn't never thought of myself as a writer really till kind of I was 30, because I always knew that I had struggled in school and I again had undiagnosed and untreated ADHD. So it's like, but so I was always scared about like becoming trying to have a livelihood where I was dependent on coming up with something or especially on a deadline because I never knew if I'd be able to or not. So there's ways in which my career could be different, my income could be different, if I hadn't, had to kind of you need a lot of time and space for the little bit. Yeah, I feel like I'm not very prolific, it's like somebody else could have had a couple books out. Anyway, I don't want to turn it into a complaint session where I'm just, lashing myself, but you get what I'm saying. Like sometimes people go like, "Oh, wow, it's like your poetry is great." It's like these are struggles, these are like long-term commitments to create a work that is substantial, that's anybody's going to care about in 5 years, not to mention 15 years or God forbid 50 years. It's like I want people, everybody on this call, I want everybody that's posting tomorrow to be trying to make something that people will care about in 50 years. Yeah, almost none of us will reach that ideal, but you get what I'm saying. This temporary, quip, blog post, tweet, TikTok culture, And so at the same time that I kind of beat myself up for taking so long on these projects, I get excited when I hear about people saying like, "Here's the book that just got published today. I've been working on it for 12 years." It's like, Sometimes it takes that to get something deep, and again, everybody's got a different process. People can do brilliant, deep things in 2 years, so, and sometimes I can write quickly too. So anyway.
But I think also what you're saying is one of the local peace economy things is what's the rush? What has convinced us that there's a rush? If you think of many of the great books and that you read about, is like they did take people 10 years. And we're missing that depth. And we always say there's the gift and the curse, they come together. And so you're talking about your curse, but it's also your gift because, you could have been swept into whatever, but that's the thing. It's the war economy that sweeps you in and owns you and takes you on a journey. But what you're saying is like, well, maybe my curse is what kept me in the gift, in this gift of exploration, and the gift of being able to be swept into teachers that have depth. So I think that's, a good thing to remember is that there's the gift and the curse. And sometimes these curses are the ones that keep us out of the churn of the war economy, that it has its own level of violence, and its own level of stealing our lives away. And, into the other, which is difficult, it's like, which difficulty do you choose? Which I'm taking as the answer to that question is like, there's the choices that were made, but it's also the choice of the peace economy, the slower, the deeper, the space of reflection and maturity, and being able to uncover, the osmosis that even happens in the not working, that is coming on you. I
Very,
think,
very important for the creative process. Absolutely.
I
There's
think
an ancient Chinese text, it's like 2000 years old, that says creativity happens at the border between hard work and leisure, and different people who know about this say similar things where it's like you have to put the time in, you have to do the research, you have to struggle, you have to sit down at the desk, you have to wrestle with the stuff, that you can't leave that out. But it's oftentimes when you're taking the hot shower, during your afternoon break, that it all comes together. You see, that's that border and that relaxed mind, that allows the deepest insights to bubble to the surface. Yeah.
and trusting those. I think we tend to judge the world through we still are trying to decolonize ourselves every day, and that awareness of the colonization of our minds, over and over again by these ideas of, like you said, speed, but like that's not necessarily, that's a war economy construct. What are we, for what, for whom, like what are the things what are the bars that we're holding up for ourselves? Are they the bars of the empire and the colonial mind? Or are they the spaces of creativity and collectivity and, curiosity and imagination, and the space for the magic, that is, I think all great pieces of art also include the magic of the fairies that drop the the co-weaving of creation, the cosmos, as you say, that's always in the community, and leaving space for it to be in community. I really want to go back to what you started with, is that we don't talk about that enough, is like that cosmos piece is, I think, what I call the magic piece. But there is that co-weaving that with the war economy, there is no room for. I I saw a movie last night, Begonia, which my favorite like filmmaker. It's a lot, but there was something about the co-weaving of the cosmos in that I think we forget, and that needs to be part of the peace economy. Because the other part is these ideas we have, this culture that we have, which is the war economy, that we don't reflect on enough. The things it forces on us, the ideas it forces on us, the demands it forces on us as humans, that aren't necessarily useful to the connective, communal yumminess of like, how do we be human together? So Drew, that's another piece I want to ask you about, is like, you're in a Bay Area community that is got a lot of features of the local peace economy that have been developed over decades. You know, like you mentioned, David Solnit. Are there some other cultivators of presence, aliveness, and humanity that you've learned from? You've mentioned a couple. Are there any others? You've mentioned some that we're all, you know, super fans of. Um, but, you know, having artist, you know, activism that is, you know, and I also want to say that in David Solnit's work, it's the fun of making it happen, but it's also one of the more astounding experiences when you're in the activist space, because it also astounds you if you're not the creator, which is one astounding way to be in relationship with it, which is like painting all day and having the community and like being able to together make something beautiful happen. But it's also then what does the viewer see is also astounding. So just that reminder of like the making of something is also the experiencing of it that we've started with also. But if you could share any other teachers of, you know, creating beautiful peace economy communal space.
Absolutely. I mean, well, it's a, I might be a little too out of the loop maybe to say like people right now who are super active, but I think back on my journey, you know, my 30-year journey or since I kind of got more involved in like radical politics and activism and stuff in my 20s. And so, but, you know, of course, I was inspired by, I always gravitated toward artists that had a political element, whether it's Bob Marley or Bob Dylan or Sweet Honey and The Rock or Joan Baez, you know, or Nina Simone, you know, or Paul Robeson, you know, or, you know, these type of things. And, you know, in the 60s, that was just so thick in the air, you know, it's like so many, even bands that weren't necessarily political were doing kind of a political vibe, you know, because of civil rights in the Vietnam War, you know, and all these things, and the social revolutions that were happening through and the arts and culture and the music was such a big part of that. But I always, you know, yeah, let's see what else in terms of I'm just overwhelmed with so many teachers and mentors and people like this. You know, Joanna Macy, obviously, I met when I was 21 years old, and you know, got to know her and just Mm, yeah, I'm getting lost kind of in so many thoughts about, but yeah, absolutely. There are people who are gifted at facilitating, you know, creativity and like this, what we could call the spoken word revolution of the 90s, you know, or whatever, in the 2000s. You know, it's like, think of how many people, how many young people were learning, you know, about poetry, you know, through this kind of the invention of the slam poetry form and the open mic and groups like Youth Speaks, you know, to me, like that's a real activist thing. You know, activism isn't always advocacy. Sometimes it's just providing educational programs or soup, you know, for somebody. That's direct action, of course, too. Handing somebody a bowl of soup or handing young people an after school program about spoken word poetry called Youth Speaks, you know, and doing that for decades. You know, this is a form of direct action. Yeah, there's so many gifted facilitators in that, but yeah, I was kind of most of my mentors were kind of eco philosophers like Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, Matthew Fox, Charlene Spretnak, Joanna Macy, Miriam McGillis, Evelyn Tucker, you know, but I also met a lot of activists in my 20s and my early 30s, you know, around the time of oh, here's what I want to close on. I knew there was something I wanted to close on because it so relates to the power of what you were just saying is, you know, I was about to say around the time we shut down the meetings of the World Trade Organization in Seattle in 1999. But while you were talking, it reminded me that the author Naomi Klein, this was a long time ago, but I remember her saying like 20 years ago, or saying that in through all of her participation in the global justice movement at that time, that there were two moments that stood out to her as being just really transcendent moments of power and majesty and mystery and joy. And they were both artistic moments. The first one that she said was when these dancers did a whole dance, you know, and it was our friend Ali Chagi Star and her group, Dancers Without Borders. And they did this dance that de-escalated a whole confrontational situation with the cops, you know, and they're doing this amazing, you know, coordinated dance in the intersection with the tear gas and de-escalating and holding the space. You know, it's like that is like real deal power of art. And so that was the first thing that Naomi Klein said. And the second thing that she said was when, we had these massive protests outside the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles in 2000, and there was a massive march led by, the Bus Riders Union and so many local groups, and they converged at the Staples Center, and Rage Against the Machine did a concert that was not permitted. That was not There was no permit for that, and they did this massive concert and it was a sea of people. And I remember being there and marching up and seeing Rage Against the Machine and all these people swaying together as one organism. And Naomi Klein said those were her two transcendent moments from the global justice movement. And I remember thinking about that, like it's not a coincidence that those are both artistic moments, right?
Thank you for reminding us that, because that's what I try to teach her all the time, that it is culture that makes the greatest effect on change. That that are to get past the stories that we hold so firmly inside. Culture as a magic carpet that rides over the places of rigidness into the place of possibility. And so, Drew, thank you for being here this day of possibility, where we did have a magic carpet ride yesterday. And it was, it did break through everything with much effort. But what was magic about it is it spoke truth, and it spoke the local peace economy principles. And I think it's a reminder that, and why is it so powerful? Like, it's because of connection. What it's like can connect to the story, to the human. And what do we love about Mondami is just he like loves to dance and be in cultural spaces and use them as often as possible to show that transcendence out of the talk into what is it to be related in joy and community together. So Drew, thanks for all your work that you do in your community and all the ways you've nourished it, and for bringing this, I just think it's so important to bring in the cosmos, which John has behind him in his screen share, of like that is also a part of this work, and it's always in tandem, always in relationship, that we work locally. It brings us closer to the earth, and it brings the cosmos in to dance with us in co-creation. So thank you for joining us. And so now, as we break out into the breakout sessions, I'd like folks to share with each other where they've seen culture, the things like Drew talked about, like after school something, things, story sharing, where have you seen these in your community, and how could you be reinvigorating them, part of them, engaged with them, that not only like serves the community, but it also serves our hearts and souls and the muscle of the local peace economy for all of us. So if everybody could just unmute and give a clap to our guest, Drew. And we're going to also share a little more of Drew's poetry and the emails we send out later. And then Marie can tell us what's next happening in the next 2 weeks, when I'm going to be in China, and she's going to have a special guest. And then she'll put us in breakout rooms. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jody. Thanks, Marie. Thanks to all of you. Really great to be with all of you.
Bye, Drew.
I have a
Thanks,
question
Drew.
for you.
Oh, wait. We have a question.
Would you consider using the word advocate? Would that feel more comfortable than activist?
Yes, I do like that word, and I do use that word actually. Sometimes I'm like, well, I'm more of an advocate and an educator, and as opposed to an organizer. Sometimes when I'm kind of apologizing, it's easy to go around and say that we need to build a mass movement, which is part of one of the things I've been saying, for 25 years. But yeah, been an advocate for movement building, more than an organizer. So I'm considering myself an artist, an educator, an advocate. Yeah, I like that. I do think that's a good word for sure.
And do you find, for me, I'm having a lot of problems with the progressives. They don't want to cross what I call ethnic, class, and cultural boundaries to reach out to people who are different from themselves. They don't want to go to the rural, and this is in Ithaca. So do you feel, I assume that you find that that's important to do that, because we can't build if we are not listening forming relationships, then listening, being brought in.
Barbara, that's the
Sorry.
core of the local peace economy work. Okay.
Yeah, well,
because
maybe
we always say if everybody's agreeing with you, you're in a cult. It's not a community.
and this is where I am. It's
Okay.
sad.
All
Thank
right.
you,
Well,
Drew.
we're gonna lose everybody if we don't break into our breakouts right now.
Okay.
Sorry. Thanks, Barbara. Marie, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, I just want to remind people or let people know who haven't been here before that these breakouts have no end. So we just let you stay until the conversation is complete, and then you won't come back to this room or this space. So you'll just leave your breakout room and then leave the Zoom recording. And when everybody has left the space, then I shut it down. But we don't come back here for any meeting or any summary or follow-up. And so, yeah, let me put everybody into breakouts. And
you want to say for next 2 weeks?
oh yeah, so in 2 weeks, I'm going to be hosting Charles Eisenstein in this space where we're going to talk about stories. We're going to continue the focus on culture, and we're going to really talk about building community around stories and some of the underlying stories that sort of animate like the way that we all are in community these days, and try and pick apart like how these stories control us and how we can use them to make our spaces better and contribute to community better. And I hope you'll join us. It's going to be great. So let me stop the recording.